Some promises are so small when they are made that no one notices them, until 20 years later, when they return carrying the weight of an entire lifetime. The last rays of the Arizona sun stretched across the prairie like molten gold, painting long shadows over Red Willow Ranch. Wind rolled gently through the tall grass, carrying the scent of dry earth, leather, and distant rain that never seemed to arrive. The old windmill turned with a slow, tired creak while a lone horse grazed quietly beside a weathered split-rail fence. Marcus Carter leaned against the porch railing, removing the dust from his worn black hat with the sleeve of his faded denim shirt. 42 years old. Every line on his face had been earned beneath western skies. Most people in Dry Creek knew him as the quiet black cowboy who rarely visited town unless supplies ran low. He spoke little, worked harder than anyone else, and carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who had learned that silence often solved more problems than anger ever could. His ranch was modest. His cattle herd had grown smaller after years of relentless drought. His closest companion was an aging chestnut horse named Boone. Loneliness had settled into the ranch years ago, so gradually that Marcus no longer noticed its presence. The evening was almost peaceful. Then Boone lifted his head. His ears pointed toward the western trail. Marcus looked up. Far beyond the fence line, a single rider emerged through the shimmering dust. Not hurried, not cautious, simply steady. The figure rode beneath the glowing sunset until horse and rider became clear against the crimson horizon. A young woman. She sat tall in the saddle with effortless confidence, her dark braided hair moving gently with the evening breeze. A weathered leather saddlebag rested behind her, worn smooth by countless miles. Tied carefully to one side hung something small wrapped in faded cloth. Marcus watched without moving. Visitors rarely came this far unless they were lost. She guided her horse through the front gate without hesitation. When she reached the porch, she climbed down gracefully and rested one hand on the saddle. For several quiet seconds, neither of them spoke. The prairie seemed to hold its breath. Only the wind answered. The young woman studied Marcus with warm, steady eyes that carried neither fear nor uncertainty. Instead, they carried recognition. She smiled. Not the smile of someone meeting a stranger. The smile of someone finally arriving home. Marcus frowned politely. I'm afraid you've got the wrong ranch. Her smile deepened ever so slightly. No. Her voice was calm, gentle, almost musical. I've spent 20 years making sure I found the right one. Marcus searched her face. Nothing. No memory. No familiar name. No distant connection. She slowly untied the small cloth bundle from her saddlebag. With careful hands, she unfolded the faded fabric. Inside rested a tiny wooden horse. Its edges had grown smooth with age. One ear had been chipped away long ago. Marcus's breathing stopped. His eyes locked onto the carving. He knew every imperfect cut, every uneven curve, every scratch left by the pocket knife he had carried as a young cowboy. He had carved that little horse beside a campfire, long before this ranch, long before his father's death, long before the years had hardened his hands. The woman gently held it out toward him. You gave this to a frightened little girl. The wind seemed colder now. Marcus reached toward the carving, but stopped just short of touching it. His voice failed him. She looked beyond him for a moment, toward the endless prairie where the evening light faded into purple shadows. There was a storm, a runaway wagon, a little girl who couldn't stop crying. Each sentence unlocked another forgotten door inside Marcus's memory. Rain, thunder, broken wheels. A terrified child hiding beneath an overturned wagon while frightened horses scattered across the plains. He remembered carrying her through waist-high mud. He remembered wrapping her inside his own coat. He remembered carving something from a piece of cedar to stop her tears while they waited for help. He remembered believing he would never see her again. Slowly, the young woman placed the tiny horse into his trembling hand. My name is Aiyana. She paused, her eyes shining softly beneath the last. Light of day, you once saved my life. Marcus finally looked into her face with new eyes. The frightened child was gone. In her place stood a woman shaped by 20 years of courage, patience, and quiet determination. Then she spoke the words that neither the fading sunset nor Marcus Carter's lonely heart would ever forget. Cowboy. She smiled through eyes filled with gratitude instead of expectation. I came to marry you. Edit. Sometimes the hardest memories are not the ones we forget. They are the ones waiting patiently for the right face to bring them back. Marcus stood motionless on the porch long after Aiyana's words disappeared into the evening wind. I came to marry you. The sentence seemed too large for the quiet little ranch. Somewhere beyond the pasture, a mourning dove called from the branches of an old cottonwood. Boone shifted his weight beside the hitching post, the leather reins creaking softly in the fading light. Marcus lowered his eyes to the tiny wooden horse resting in his palm. The smooth cedar felt warm despite the cool desert breeze. His thumb slowly traced the chipped ear. He remembered carving it with an old pocket knife while rain hammered against an overturned wagon. Not because he was skilled with wood, because a frightened little girl had been crying so hard that nothing else seemed to calm her. He looked back at Aiyana. I thought your family found you that same night. They did. Her smile remained gentle. My grandfather followed your horse tracks until sunrise. Marcus exhaled quietly. I never knew. You weren't supposed to. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The prairie settled into that familiar evening silence where every sound seemed to travel farther than usual. Crickets had begun singing beneath the tall grass. The smell of mesquite smoke drifted from somewhere beyond the hills. Finally, Marcus stepped aside. You've ridden a long way. I have. You should come inside. Aiyana nodded once. She untied the weathered saddlebag from her horse before following him into the cabin. The room was simple. A rough pine table stood near the window. An iron stove occupied one corner. Old saddles hung neatly against the wall, beside a weathered rifle that looked as though it had not been touched in years. Nothing inside suggested comfort. Everything suggested endurance. Marcus lit an oil lamp. Its warm glow softened the hard edges of the room. I don't get many visitors. I know. You know? She smiled faintly. I asked about you in every town between here and the reservation. He looked up. For 20 years? I stopped counting after 15. Marcus slowly removed his hat. Why? Aiyana carefully placed the saddlebag on the table. She opened the worn leather flap and removed several carefully wrapped bundles. Not gold. Not jewelry. Not money. Only memories. The first was an old blue bandana, faded almost white with age. Marcus recognized it instantly. He had wrapped it around the little girl's scraped hands after pulling her from beneath the broken wagon. The second was a rusted pocket compass. Its cracked glass reflected the lamplight. I gave that away too. You said every traveler should know where home is. Marcus smiled despite himself. I used to say things like that. You still do. He laughed quietly. I don't think I've spoken that much in years. Aiyana's eyes wandered around the cabin. You've been alone for a long time. Since my father passed. And before that, Marcus hesitated. Long enough. She understood without asking another question. Instead, she reached into the bottom of the saddlebag one final time. This bundle was wrapped in soft buckskin tied with a faded leather cord. She untied it carefully. Inside rested a folded letter. The paper had yellowed with age. Its edges were worn but protected. Marcus frowned. My name. His voice barely rose above a whisper. My father wrote that. She nodded. He gave it to my grandfather. Marcus stared in disbelief. He said one day, Aiyana Jin, the truth rarely arrives all at once. It comes a page at a time, asking whether your heart is ready before your eyes ever begin to read. Marcus held the letter carefully, afraid that one careless movement might damage paper that had survived 2 decades. The oil lamp flickered softly. Outside, the desert night had settled over Red Willow Ranch. Wind whispered against the cabin walls, carrying the dry scent of sagebrush through the cracked window. Aiyana remained silent. She understood that some moments belonged to memory alone. Marcus unfolded the yellowed pages. The handwriting was unmistakable, strong, patient, steady, exactly as he remembered. My son, if these words ever reach your hands, then the little girl we once protected has found her way back to you. Do not be surprised. Kindness has a longer memory than hatred ever will. Marcus stopped reading. His father had always spoken that way. Simple words, heavy meaning. He continued. You were only 22 when we found her. You believed we rescued one frightened child. The truth is, she rescued something inside us as well. Marcus frowned. He slowly lowered the letter. What does that mean? Aiyana looked toward the fireplace. My grandfather told me your father changed after that storm. Marcus looked back to the page. He did. Another line caught his attention. There are friendships this country refuses to understand. That does not make them wrong. Marcus remembered the stories he had heard growing up. Most of them warned people to stay away from Apache territory. His father never repeated those stories. Instead, he often disappeared for days without explanation. Marcus had always assumed he was buying cattle or checking distant grazing land. Perhaps he had been doing something entirely different. The next paragraph answered the question before Marcus could ask it. Chief Nantan became my brother long before you were old enough to ride. We buried soldiers together, shared water during drought, protected one another's families when fear ruled wiser men. Marcus slowly looked up. Chief Nantan. Aiyana nodded. My grandfather. Silence settled over the room. Not uncomfortable, just full. Marcus suddenly realized how little he had known about the man who raised him. My father never told me. He wanted to. Aiyana answered gently. But the town changed. Marcus understood. Dry Creek had become less forgiving over the years. People trusted rumors more than neighbors. Some friendships became dangerous simply because others refused to understand them. Marcus returned to the letter. If anything should happen to me, never allow bitterness to become your inheritance. Land can be stolen. Money can disappear. But character belongs only to the man who protects it. Marcus swallowed hard. His father had died only months after writing those words. A fever. Quick. Unexpected. There had been no chance for final conversations. Only unfinished questions. His eyes reached the final page. There, folded neatly between the paper, rested something else. A small hand-drawn sketch. Marcus carefully unfolded it. His breath caught. Two young men stood beside a broad cottonwood tree. One was unmistakably his father. The other wore traditional Apache clothing. Between them flowed a narrow stream. Across the bottom, written in faded ink, were 6 simple words. The water belongs to everyone equally. Marcus stared at the drawing. A stream? Aiyana stepped closer. My grandfather called it the living spring. I've never heard of it. Almost no one has. She pointed toward the sketch. The spring never dried. Marcus frowned. That isn't possible. That's what everyone believed. Her voice remained calm. But my grandfather said the spring was hidden after outsiders began fighting over water. Marcus turned the drawing over. On the back appeared another surprise. A rough map. Not detailed. Just enough landmarks to follow. The old cottonwood. 3 distant hills. A bend in the creek. And a small X drawn beside a circle. Marcus recognized every landmark. They all lay somewhere beyond the northern pasture. I've ridden that land hundreds of times. You weren't looking for a spring. She smiled softly. You were looking for cattle. Marcus could not argue. His father had hidden more than memories. He had hidden hope. Marcus folded the map carefully before placing it beside the carved wooden horse. 2 ordinary objects. A child's toy. A faded drawing. Neither worth a single dollar. Yet together they carried a fortune measured in trust instead of gold. Outside, Boone suddenly lifted his head and gave a low, uneasy snort. Marcus looked toward the window. Far across the moonlit prairie, a faint lantern moved slowly along the northern ridge. Someone was watching the ranch. And whoever that rider was, he already knew the search for the living spring had begun. Respect is rarely earned with speeches. More often, it is built quietly, one honest act at a time. The lantern on the distant ridge disappeared before dawn. Marcus barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the rough map hidden inside his father's letter. The faded ink had awakened questions that 20 years of ranch work had never answered. At first light, golden rays spilled across Red Willow Ranch. Boone stood ready beside the corral, saddled before Marcus had even finished his coffee. Aiyana stepped onto the porch carrying 2 canteens. You plan to look for the spring. Marcus smiled faintly. You already knew. You've been staring at that map since sunrise. He folded the paper carefully into his vest pocket. I've ridden those hills most of my life. And today you'll see them differently. Before either of them could mount their horses, the sound of frantic hoofbeats echoed across the valley. A rider burst through the front gate, his horse breathing hard beneath a coat of sweat. It was Samuel Dawson, a neighboring rancher whose land bordered the eastern creek. His weathered face showed both exhaustion and worry. Marcus hurried forward. What happened? It's Daisy. The gray mare. Samuel nodded. She collapsed before daylight. Marcus frowned. Snakebite. I don't know. We've tried everything. Samuel's eyes shifted toward Aiyana. Only for a moment. There was hesitation. Not unkindness. Only uncertainty. Marcus noticed. "This is Aiyana." Samuel removed his hat politely. "Morning, ma'am." She returned a quiet nod. "What symptoms?" Samuel looked surprised by the question. "She won't drink. Her breathing is shallow. She can't stand." Aiyana listened carefully. "How many horses drank from the same trough?" "3. Only one became sick." Samuel thought for a moment. "Yes." She looked toward Marcus. "We should go." The ride to Samuel's ranch took nearly an hour. Dry grass waved beneath a cloudless sky while hawks circled lazily overhead. As they approached the corrals, several ranch hands stood around the gray mare. The animal lay on her side, breathing heavily. One cowboy shook his head. "We're losing her." Aiyana knelt without saying a word. She rested one hand gently against the mare's neck. The frightened animal flinched, then slowly became still. Marcus watched carefully. There was nothing dramatic about her movements. No rush. No performance. Only patience. She examined the horse's eyes. Its tongue. Its hooves. Then she walked toward the nearby water trough. She dipped her fingers into the water before smelling them. A faint crease appeared across her forehead. "This water isn't clean." Samuel looked confused. "It comes from the creek." "Not today." She pointed toward the edge of the trough. Tiny green algae floated near the boards. The heat trapped the water. Something spoiled it. Marcus leaned closer. He would never have noticed. Neither had anyone else. Aiyana walked into the nearby meadow. She searched among waist-high grass until she found several wild plants growing beneath scattered mesquite trees. She carefully gathered leaves and roots before returning. One ranch hand whispered quietly, "What's she doing?" Another shrugged. Marcus said nothing. He trusted her calm more than anyone else's fear. Using Samuel's iron kettle, Aiyana prepared a simple herbal mixture. The smell of crushed sage, willow bark, and prairie mint drifted through the warm air. She allowed the liquid to cool before gently offering small amounts to the mare. Then, she waited. No promises. No grand declarations. Only quiet confidence. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Cowboys worked in silence, while stealing hopeful glances toward the horse. Marcus remained beside Aiyana beneath the shade of a cottonwood. "You learned this from your grandfather?" "And my grandmother. They believed every living thing speaks." Marcus smiled. "I've spent 40 years around horses. I never learned to listen." She looked toward the recovering mare. Most people only hear what they expect. Near midday, the gray mare lifted her head. A ranch hand gasped. Slowly, carefully, she folded her legs beneath her body. One determined effort later, she stood, unsteady, but standing. No one cheered. The moment felt too quiet for celebration. Instead, hats came off one by one. Samuel looked at Aiyana with new eyes. "I owe you." She shook her head gently. "You owe the horse clean water." Even Marcus laughed softly. As the afternoon breeze carried away the last traces of fear, Samuel walked beside Marcus toward the fence. "I've known you 20 years. Marcus waited. Samuel lowered his voice. "If that young woman tells you to follow your father's map." He glanced toward Aiyana, who was gently brushing the gray mare's neck. "I'd follow it too." Marcus looked across the valley toward the distant northern hills. The hidden spring suddenly felt closer than ever. Neither man noticed the stranger watching from the far ridge through a brass spyglass. The rider turned his horse without a word. Somewhere ahead, someone else had decided that Marcus Carter and Aiyana had already learned far too much. Greed never knocks on the front door. It watches from a distance until kindness uncovers something worth stealing. The next morning arrived wrapped in cool mist that clung to the prairie before surrendering to the rising sun. Marcus stood beside the corral tightening Boone's saddle. The hand-drawn map rested safely inside his vest. Aiyana emerged from the cabin carrying fresh bread wrapped in linen. "You still want to ride north?" Marcus nodded. Samuel's words settled something in my mind. He believes the spring is real now. He believes you. Aiyana smiled gently. That matters more. They left Red Willow Ranch shortly after sunrise. The northern pasture stretched farther than most people imagined. Rolling grasslands slowly gave way to rocky hills where scattered cottonwoods interrupted the endless sea of sagebrush. Marcus unfolded the map several times. Each landmark appeared exactly where his father had drawn it. 3 weathered hills, a dry creek bed, a lone granite outcrop shaped like an eagle's wing. Everything matched. Only one symbol remained. The large cottonwood. By late afternoon they found it. The tree towered above the surrounding prairie, its massive branches casting welcome shade over the dry earth. Marcus dismounted first. I've passed this tree 100 times. Aiyana slowly circled its enormous trunk. My grandfather said people only find what they're willing to notice. Marcus examined the roots. Nothing. Only cracked soil. Dead grass. Years of wind. Then Aiyana stopped. She knelt beside a patch of unusually green moss growing between two exposed roots. Marcus frowned. There shouldn't be moss here. She pressed her hand against the ground. It feels cooler. Together they cleared away loose stones and fallen branches. Hidden beneath them rested a flat slab of limestone almost perfectly concealed by dirt and roots. Marcus wedged an iron bar beneath its edge. With one powerful effort, the stone shifted. A breath of cool air escaped from below. Both of them froze. Marcus looked down. Darkness. Then, the unmistakable sound. Water. Slow. Steady. Flowing. They carefully lowered themselves through the narrow opening. A natural chamber stretched beneath the tree. Crystal clear water flowed through polished stone before disappearing into underground channels that continued beneath the valley. Marcus removed his hat. He simply stood there listening. 20 years of drought. Countless dying fields. Neighbors forced to sell their land. All while fresh water had quietly flowed beneath their feet. My father knew. Aiyana nodded. So did my grandfather. They hid it. They protected it. Marcus knelt beside the spring. The water was cold enough to numb his fingertips, clear enough to reflect the sunlight pouring through narrow cracks above. He understood immediately. If greedy men had discovered this place years earlier, fences would have surrounded it within days. Only the wealthy would have controlled it. His father had chosen silence instead. Aiyana noticed something carved into the stone wall. She brushed away years of dust. Simple words appeared beneath the fading light. Shared water. Shared life. Marcus smiled quietly. That sounds like him. And my grandfather. For several peaceful minutes, neither of them spoke. The spring itself seemed sacred. Not because it was hidden, because it belonged to no single person. As they prepared to leave, Marcus noticed fresh boot prints in the damp soil. He frowned. These aren't ours. Aiyana knelt beside them. They're recent. Very recent. Marcus followed the tracks toward the tunnel entrance. Outside, the prairie looked unchanged. Except Boone. The old horse stood uneasy, ears pinned back. Marcus immediately reached for the reins. Then he stopped. Across the open grassland, 3 mounted riders waited silently upon a distant ridge. None wore sheriff's badges. None carried ranch brands Marcus recognized. Their leader tipped his black hat slightly, almost respectfully. Then all 3 turned and rode away without a word. Aiyana watched them disappear. They weren't lost. No, they wanted us to know we'd been seen. Marcus looked once more toward the hidden spring before carefully replacing the limestone slab exactly as they had found it. The secret would remain safe. For now, as the sun dipped toward the western horizon, the 2 of them began riding home. Neither noticed a 4th rider leaving Dry Creek at the same moment. His destination was the sprawling ranch of Victor Hawthorne, the wealthiest landowner in the valley. By nightfall, Hawthorne would receive a simple message. Marcus Carter had found something beneath the old cottonwood, and whatever it was valuable enough to protect with silence. The most dangerous man is not the one who draws a gun first. It is the one who smiles while convincing everyone else to do his work for him. Victor Hawthorne received the message before sunrise. His ranch house overlooked nearly half the valley, built on a rise where every passing wagon could be seen for miles. Polished oak floors, imported glass windows, and expensive furniture stood in sharp contrast to the weathered cabins owned by ordinary ranchers. The messenger removed his hat. They found something beneath the old cottonwood. Hawthorne looked up from his breakfast. What kind of something? I couldn't see. But they hid it again. They spent nearly an hour underground. Hawthorne's fingers stopped tapping the table. Underground. His pale gray eyes narrowed. So the old stories were true. The messenger hesitated. What should we do? Hawthorne folded his napkin with perfect care. Nothing. The man looked confused. For now, a frightened animal runs. A confident one walks into the trap. Hours later, Marcus and Aiyana rode into Dry Creek for supplies. The familiar streets felt different. People still tipped their hats toward Marcus. But conversation stopped as soon as they passed. Store windows suddenly became fascinating. Coffee cups lingered halfway to waiting lips. Whispers moved faster than horses. Marcus noticed. So did I. Aiyana spoke quietly without looking toward the crowd. You've been here before. Not like this. They tied their horses outside Miller's general store. Inside, shelves overflowed with flour, coffee beans, lantern oil, rope, and canned peaches. Old Mrs. Miller greeted Marcus warmly. Morning. Morning, Abigail. Her smile reached Aiyana. You must be the traveler everyone keeps talking about. Aiyana answered with calm courtesy. I suppose I am. Abigail nodded. Don't pay attention to talk. Small towns grow stories faster than wheat. Marcus almost smiled. Before anyone could speak again, the front door opened. Victor Hawthorne entered without hurry. His black coat carried no dust despite the dry roads. Everything about him suggested careful control. He removed his gloves one finger at a time. Marcus Carter. Marcus turned. Hawthorne. The wealthy rancher smiled pleasantly. I hear you've made an interesting new acquaintance. Marcus remained calm. I have. Hawthorne looked toward Aiyana. His smile never disappeared. Miss Aiyana. A beautiful name. She answered only with a slight nod. Hawthorne continued. I've always admired people who travel great distances for important reasons. His voice remained friendly. Almost too friendly. Marcus recognized the tone. Men who intended honesty rarely polished every sentence. What brings you to my business today? Marcus asked. Coffee, flour, and perhaps conversation. The room became perfectly still. Hawthorne wandered casually between the shelves. My father once believed there were hidden springs beneath this valley. Marcus's heartbeat slowed. His face did not change. Did he? Oh yes. He wasted years searching. He never found one. Marcus shrugged lightly. Sounds disappointing. Hawthorne stopped beside a barrel of oats. Perhaps. Or perhaps someone else did. Silence. Only the ticking wall clock could be heard. Aiyana watched Hawthorne's reflection in the store window instead of looking directly at him. She noticed what Marcus had not. A silver pocket watch chain hung beneath his coat. Attached to it, a tiny brass key, exactly the same shape as the old key sketched in Marcus's father's letter beside the map. Only for an instant. Then the coat shifted. The key disappeared again. Hawthorne smiled once more. If either of you ever discover something valuable. He adjusted his gloves. I hope you'll remember that protecting property requires considerable resources. Marcus met his eyes. So does protecting people. For the first time, Hawthorne's smile weakened. Only slightly, but enough. He tipped his hat politely before leaving the store. The bell above the door rang once. Then silence returned. Old Mrs. Miller slowly exhaled. I don't trust a man whose boots stay clean in this valley. Marcus looked toward the empty doorway. He knows. Aiyana nodded. He suspects. And suspicion is enough. As they stepped back into the afternoon sunlight, Marcus noticed 3 unfamiliar riders sitting outside the hotel across the street. The same 3 men from the northern ridge. They pretended not to watch him, which only confirmed they were. Marcus climbed into the saddle. We're not riding straight home. Aiyana understood immediately. You think he'll send them to the spring? I know he will. The race to protect a promise made 20 years earlier had quietly begun. And this time, the danger was no longer hidden beneath the earth. It was riding openly across the valley. Some victories are won by holding your ground. Others require the courage to walk away before someone else pays the price. The ride back to Red Willow Ranch was quieter than either of them expected. The western sky burned with deep shades of amber and crimson while long shadows stretched across the prairie. Dust drifted beneath Boone's steady hooves, and somewhere in the distance a lone coyote called into the approaching night. Marcus never once looked behind him. He already knew they were being followed. Not closely, not carelessly, professionally. 3 riders, always just beyond sight, always close enough to remind him they were there. When the ranch finally appeared beyond the cottonwoods, Aiyana slowed her horse beside him. They want us to feel watched. Marcus nodded. Because fear makes people careless. And desperate. He looked toward the old barn. Neither one is happening. That evening they secured every gate, checked every horse, and extinguished every unnecessary lantern. The ranch settled into darkness. Only the faint glow from the cabin window remained. Inside, Marcus spread his father's map across the table once more. Beside it rested the carved wooden horse. The faded bandana, the old compass, and the letter. For ordinary objects, together they had changed everything. Aiyana poured coffee into 2 tin cups. She watched Marcus study the map without speaking. Finally, she asked quietly, "If Hawthorne cannot find the spring?" Marcus finished her thought. "He'll come after the people who know where it is." She lowered her eyes. "That means me." Marcus looked up immediately. "It means both of us." She smiled sadly. "No. It began with my family. It doesn't have to destroy yours." Marcus stood. "I've already chosen." "You don't understand." "I do." He walked to the window. Outside, the prairie lay peaceful beneath thousands of stars. "My father protected your grandfather. Now it's my turn." Aiyana closed her eyes for a brief moment. "My grandfather warned me this might happen." Marcus turned. "What did he say?" "He said." She hesitated. "Gratitude should never become another person's burden." The words lingered between them. Marcus suddenly understood the quiet sadness he had noticed since her arrival. She had not come expecting rescue. She had come prepared to leave if staying endangered him. Long after Marcus had fallen asleep in the rocking chair beside the dying fire, Aiyana remained awake. The moonlight spilled softly through the cabin window. She looked one final time toward Marcus. His hat rested across his knees. The carved wooden horse remained in his hand. Even asleep, he had not let go. Aiyana smiled through glistening eyes. Then she quietly rose. Without making a sound, she folded her blanket. She placed the old compass beside Marcus's coffee cup. Next to it she left a single handwritten note. "Thank you for saving me twice. The first time, you saved my life. The second, you reminded me what kindness looks like. Please don't lose your home because of me." She folded the letter carefully. Outside, she saddled her horse beneath the pale moonlight. The cool night breeze carried the scent of cedar and distant rain. Every movement was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She paused beside the old cottonwood at the edge of the yard. Her fingertips rested briefly against its rough bark. "My grandfather," she whispered into the darkness. "I kept my promise." She climbed into the saddle. Without looking back, she guided her horse toward the northern trail. The ranch disappeared behind her one quiet step at a time. An hour later, Marcus awoke. The fire had nearly burned out. The cabin felt strangely empty. His eyes immediately found the folded note, then the untouched second coffee cup, then the missing saddle outside the window. His heartbeat quickened. He rushed onto the porch. Only fresh hoof prints crossed the dew-covered ground. Boone lifted his head uneasily. Marcus read the note once. Then again. He folded it carefully and slipped it inside his vest beside his father's letter. For several long seconds he stood beneath the fading stars. He understood exactly why she had left. Not because she doubted him, because she loved him enough to protect what little peace remained in his life. Marcus walked quietly to the barn. Without haste, without anger, he tightened Boone's saddle with practiced hands. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, he placed the carved wooden horse safely into his pocket. Then he mounted. He was no longer riding to protect a hidden spring. He was riding to keep a promise that neither time, fear, nor distance would ever be allowed to break. Truth does not become powerful the moment it is spoken. It becomes powerful the moment ordinary. People decide they are no longer afraid to believe it. Marcus caught up with Aiyana just beyond the old wooden bridge crossing Red Willow Creek. She had stopped beneath a towering cottonwood, her horse drinking quietly from the shallow water while the first light of morning painted the valley in soft gold. She turned before he spoke. "I knew you would come." Marcus climbed down from Boone. "You also knew I wouldn't let you leave alone." A faint smile crossed her face. "I hoped." He removed the folded note from his vest. "You don't get to decide what's worth protecting." She lowered her eyes. "I only wanted to keep you safe. You are part of that." The words hung gently between them. Neither hurried to fill the silence. The breeze carried the scent of wet earth and cottonwood leaves. For the first time since arriving at Red Willow Ranch, Aiyana allowed herself to believe she was no longer carrying the promise alone. Then the peaceful morning shattered beneath the sound of galloping horses. 3 riders emerged from the eastern ridge. The same men Marcus had seen outside Hawthorne's hotel. They spread out without drawing their revolvers, slowly blocking every path back toward the ranch. Their leader removed his hat. "Morning." Marcus remained beside Aiyana. "What do you want?" "A conversation." Marcus almost smiled. Men who ride in circles usually don't. The rider ignored the remark. Mr. Hawthorne would like the map. There is no map. There is. And we'd rather leave here without searching your saddlebags. Aiyana quietly stepped forward. You already know where the spring is. The rider looked at her with mild surprise. We know the valley. We don't know the entrance. Marcus understood immediately. Hawthorne's men had followed them, but they had never actually seen the hidden chamber beneath the cottonwood. The secret was still safe. For now, Marcus answered calmly. You've wasted your ride. The leader sighed. I was hoping you'd be reasonable. Before anyone moved another inch, a new sound echoed across the prairie. Hoofbeats. Many of them. Not 3. Not 5. Nearly a dozen. Every head turned. From the western trail rode Samuel Dawson. Beside him came 6 neighboring ranchers Marcus recognized immediately. Old Ben Cooper. Jacob Ellis. The Miller brothers. Even Reverend Thomas rode with them, his Bible tied behind the saddle instead of resting in a church pew. Samuel guided his horse forward until he stood beside Marcus. We figured you might need company. The leader frowned. This isn't your business. Samuel looked toward Marcus. It became ours yesterday. Old Ben removed his hat. When that young woman saved Daisy. He nodded toward Aiyana. She saved my harvest too. Another rancher spoke quietly. We all drink from the same sky. No one owns the rain. The 3 hired riders exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected 2 people, not an entire valley beginning to stand together. The leader looked toward Samuel. You planning to fight us? Samuel shook his head. No, we're planning to watch. The answer confused him. Marcus understood. No rifles were raised. No threats were spoken. Only witnesses. Too many witnesses. Hawthorne's men had been hired to intimidate, not murder half the valley in broad daylight. The leader slowly placed both hands on his saddle horn. This isn't over. Marcus answered quietly. I know. The riders turned their horses and disappeared across the hills. No one celebrated. Everyone understood the danger had merely changed shape. Samuel rode closer. We should head into Dry Creek. Marcus frowned. Why? Samuel looked toward the distant church steeple rising above the town. Because Hawthorne won't stop out here. He'll do what powerful men always do. He'll turn the town against you. Aiyana's expression remained calm. My grandfather warned me about that. Reverend Thomas nodded slowly. Then perhaps it's time the truth stopped hiding. Marcus looked around at the familiar faces surrounding him. These were ordinary people. Men who had spent their lives repairing fences, raising cattle, burying loved ones, and praying for rain. None of them considered themselves heroes. Yet every one of them had chosen to ride here. Not because they shared Marcus's blood, because they shared his values. As the group turned toward Dry Creek together, the carved wooden horse rested quietly inside Marcus's pocket. For 20 years it had been a child's keepsake. Before another sunset, it would become the piece of evidence that reminded an entire town how one small act of kindness could outlive every lie ever told against it. Justice does not always arrive wearing a sheriff's badge. Sometimes it rides into town beside ordinary people who finally decide they have seen enough. Dry Creek had never looked so quiet. By the time Marcus, Aiyana, Samuel Dawson, Reverend Thomas, and the neighboring ranchers rode down the main street, every storefront had emptied. Shopkeepers stood in their doorways. Children peered from behind wagon wheels. The blacksmith paused with his hammer still resting on the anvil. News always traveled faster than horses. Victor Hawthorne was already waiting in front of the town hall. His black coat was spotless. His smile was measured. Behind him stood 4 hired riders and Deputy Collins, whose polished badge reflected the afternoon sun. Hawthorne spread his hands politely. Marcus, I was beginning to wonder when you would arrive. Marcus stopped Boone several yards away before climbing to the ground. I figured you'd rather hold court here than out on the prairie. A few quiet laughs drifted through the crowd. Hawthorne ignored them. I've only come to protect this valley. And this woman? He glanced toward Aiyana. She carries maps that belong to honest citizens. Aiyana met his eyes without lowering hers. My grandfather protected what was never yours. Hawthorne's smile thinned. Then perhaps the town should decide. He turned toward the gathering crowd. Ask yourselves one question. If these 2 have discovered a hidden spring, why haven't they shared it? Silence followed. People exchanged uncertain glances. Fear had always been Hawthorne's strongest ally. Marcus reached into his vest. Several men instinctively stiffened. Instead of drawing a weapon, he removed the tiny carved wooden horse. The old cedar had darkened with age. Its chipped ear caught the sunlight. Marcus held it high. 20 years ago, he spoke calmly enough for the entire square to hear. I found a little girl alone after a storm. I didn't ask who her family was. I didn't ask what tribe she belonged to. I only knew she was scared. He gently placed the little carving into Aiyana's hands. I made this because kindness costs less than hate. The square remained perfectly still. Aiyana slowly stepped beside him. She unfolded Marcus's father's letter. Without raising her voice, she read the final paragraph. If these words are ever heard by honest people, remember this. Water belongs to life, not to greed. And the measure of a man is never what he owns, but what he refuses to steal. The familiar handwriting silenced even the whispers. Reverend Thomas accepted the letter. He studied the signature, then quietly nodded. I baptized Elias Carter. He looked toward the townspeople. This is his hand. No question. Samuel Dawson stepped forward next. When my mare was dying, he pointed toward Aiyana. She saved her. She asked for nothing. Old Ben Cooper removed his hat. So did she. The Miller brothers stepped beside Marcus. So did she. One by one. Without speeches. Without anger. The people Hawthorne believed he controlled quietly crossed the dusty street. Not toward power. Toward truth. Deputy Collins looked around uncertainly. His hand slowly slipped away from his holster. Hawthorne's confident smile disappeared for the first time. You fools. He laughed bitterly. Do you really think they'll share that water forever? Marcus answered before anyone else could. My father did. So will I. He reached into his pocket once more. This time he removed the faded map. The crowd watched silently. Marcus walked to the center of the square. Then, he folded the map in half. Again, and once more. Finally, he placed it inside Reverend Thomas's Bible. The map never belonged to me. It belongs to every family that depends on this valley. Hawthorne stared in disbelief. You trust them? Marcus smiled. I already do. No sheriff announced an arrest. No gunfight echoed through town. There was no need. The valley had already judged the man standing before them. One hired rider quietly removed Hawthorne's saddle horse. Another simply rode away. The others followed. Not because they feared Marcus. Because they no longer respected the man who paid them. Hawthorne stood alone. Completely alone. Weeks later, neighbors worked side by side to build wooden channels carrying fresh spring water across the valley. No fences surrounded the living spring. No locks guarded it. Only trust. On a warm autumn evening, beneath the great cottonwood where Marcus's father and Chief Nandan had once shaken hands, Marcus and Aiyana exchanged simple wedding vows surrounded by ranchers, Apache elders, and children who no longer cared where one family ended and another began. Before the ceremony ended, Aiyana placed the tiny wooden horse into the hands of a young orphan who had wandered into the celebration. The little boy smiled. Marcus smiled too. The circle had quietly closed. Because 20 years earlier, one cowboy had believed he was saving a frightened child. In the end, she had returned to save an entire valley. And out on the frontier, where dust covered every road and time erased almost every footprint, people eventually forgot the wealth Victor Hawthorne once possessed. But they never forgot the black cowboy who chose compassion over fear, or the Apache woman who traveled 20 years to keep a promise that kindness had written long before either of them knew what love would become.